I still remember the sound of laughter in the War Council chamber. 14 senior commanders of the Drashan hegemony, the most feared military power in 3 galactic sectors, laughing at a diplomat who had come to save their lives. If I close my eyes right now, I can still hear it, each voice distinct, each throat producing its own shade of contempt. That laughter follows me through my days and sits beside me in the dark hours before sleep. It haunts me, because I understand what those commanders were laughing at, and I understand what it cost every single one of them. The Ylthari ambassador's name was Chalon Voss. He was old for his species, his gray skin cracked along the jaw ridges, the way it does when a Ylthari has endured decades of sustained, unrelenting stress. The cracks were deep, running from his temple plates down to the cartilage beneath his chin, and they told the story of a creature who had not known peace in a very long time. He had not been invited to the session. He was not authorized to enter the War Council chamber under any circumstance. And yet he walked in uninvited, past 2 armed sentries who were too stunned by the breach of protocol to stop a foreign diplomat from pushing through the most restricted doors on our capital station. That alone should have told every officer in the room something important. Chalon Voss was not a creature prone to reckless behavior. Whatever had driven him through those doors was stronger than a lifetime of diplomatic training, stronger than the fear of arrest, stronger than the certain knowledge that his career would be destroyed by this single act of trespass. High Commander Surath Van was mid-sentence when Chalon entered. Surath was describing the attack plan with the confident precision that made him the most respected strategist in Drashan military history. 3 human colony worlds on the frontier, all lightly defended, all rich in rare mineral deposits that the hegemony needed for our weapons development programs. We would strike all 3 simultaneously, using 3 independent fleet groups, strip the colonies of every resource worth taking, capture prisoners for political leverage, and withdraw behind our fortified borders before any human response fleet could mobilize. It was clean, fast, and brutal, the same strategy that had broken 19 other species across 400 years of Drashan expansion. That strategy had never failed, not once, in 4 centuries of application against every type of civilization the galaxy had to offer. Surath stopped talking when Chalon walked in. The room went quiet, and every commander turned to look at the uninvited visitor standing at the far end of the chamber. The old Ylthari was trembling, not from cold because the station maintained comfortable temperatures for all visiting species, not from age because Ylthari do not develop tremors until much later in their lifespans. He was trembling from something I had never seen in a diplomat before, and I have spent 30 years reading the body language of over 100 alien species as part of my work as the hegemony's senior tactical advisor. Chalon Voss was afraid in a way that went beyond personal danger. He was afraid the way someone is afraid when they have seen a catastrophe approaching from a great distance, and they know, with absolute certainty, that the people standing in its path will not move. He spoke without permission. He spoke without greeting. He broke every rule of interspecies diplomatic conduct that governs civilized interaction in the galactic community, and he did it because he knew, in that moment, that those rules no longer mattered compared to what he had come to say. 11 years ago, he told us, his voice cracking under the weight of what he was describing, the Ylthari Directorate had attacked a human mining outpost in a disputed border region called the Kepler Margins. It was a minor skirmish by galactic standards, the kind of incident that happens along contested frontiers every few decades. 2 Ylthari warships destroyed a small mining facility and killed 47 human workers. The humans lost their outpost. The Ylthari lost 2 ships to the outpost's automated defense platforms during the engagement, an acceptable trade by military calculations. The Ylthari leadership reviewed the outcome, determined that the strategic objective had been achieved, and classified the incident as resolved. It was not resolved. Over the following 11 years, Chalon told us, the humans dismantled the Ylthari Directorate's ability to wage war without ever firing another weapon. Their methods were so subtle, so patient, and so thorough that the Ylthari did not even recognize what was happening until it was nearly complete. Their outer fleet of 46 warships was lost through a cascading series of navigational failures, fuel contaminations, and crew reassignment orders that had been inserted into their command systems so delicately that each incident appeared to be an unrelated accident. 6 colony governors were arrested by their own security forces after evidence of profound corruption appeared in public databases overnight. Evidence so thorough and so precisely documented that the governors' own families refused to speak in their defense. The Ylthari economy, once the strongest in their sector, was being slowly crushed by trade interdictions and contract terminations, so subtle that their finest economists could not prove any of it was deliberate rather than natural market movement. And through all of it, Chelun said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper, the humans maintained perfect diplomatic courtesy. They attended Ylthari cultural festivals. They signed minor trade agreements. Their ambassadors smiled and shook hands, and expressed hope for continued peaceful relations. They were dismantling the Ylthari Directorate the way water dissolves stone, one invisible layer at a time, while standing right beside them and pretending nothing was happening. The council chamber was silent when Chelun finished his account. Every commander stared at the old diplomat, processing his words, measuring them against their own experience, their own confidence, their own 4 centuries of unbroken military dominance. Then Chelun Voss said the words, "I have never been able to forget." He said them slowly, each one placed with the careful emphasis of someone who knows this is the most important thing they will ever say. They do not forget, they do not forgive, and they do not stop. That was when the laughter started. Admiral Drayan Kor laughed first. He was the commander of our primary strike fleet, a veteran of 9 major campaigns, a man who had personally overseen the conquest of the Polari Confederation and reduced 2 of their homeworlds to vassal states in a single season. Drayan looked at Chelun Voss the way a predator looks at something too small and too frightened to be taken seriously. The Ylthari, Drayan said, were merchants and scholars. They had no military tradition worth speaking of, no warrior culture, no fleet doctrine beyond point and shoot. Of course the humans had outmaneuvered them. A clever child could have outmaneuvered them. The Drashan hegemony was not the Ylthari Directorate. We had the largest standing fleet in 3 sectors. We had a warrior tradition stretching back to the founding of our first interstellar colony. We had 400 years of unbroken conquest behind us. We had shattered species that made the humans look like insects scratching in the dirt of their single unremarkable world. The other commanders joined the laughter. It filled the chamber, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling, drowning out whatever Chelun tried to say in response. Surath Ven dismissed the ambassador with a wave of his hand and a formal order to remove him from the premises. 2 sentries escorted Chelun Voss from the chamber, and as the doors closed behind him, I caught one last glimpse of his face. He was not angry, he was not humiliated. He looked resigned, the way someone looks when they have done everything they could and know it was not enough. Surath resumed his briefing. The vote was unanimous. We would strike the human colonies in 9 standard days. I did not laugh. I want that recorded clearly, because it matters to me even now, years later, when I look back at this moment and wish I could reach through time and shake my own shoulders. I did not laugh, but I also did not speak. I was the senior tactical advisor to the War Council, and my entire purpose in that room was to identify threats, assess risks, and recommend adjustments to strategy. That was my function. That was why I held my rank and my clearance and my seat at the table. And I should have spoken. I should have stood up and said that a trembling diplomat who breaks every rule of conduct to deliver an unsolicited warning is not someone to be dismissed with laughter. I should have pointed out the obvious, that the Ylthari had not come to threaten us, or to demand anything, or to posture for political advantage. They had come to beg. And there is a profound difference between a species that threatens and a species that begs, because a species does not beg unless it has already learned, through direct and painful experience, that begging is the only option it has left. But I stayed silent, because I did not want to be the officer who showed fear in a room full of conquerors who had never known defeat. That silence is something I carry with me every single day of my life. I was assigned to Admiral Drayan's flagship for the operation, a posting that would have been an honor under any other circumstances. We departed the capital station 3 days later with a strike group of 22 warships, while 2 additional groups of similar size headed for the other 2 target colonies, along separate approach vectors. As our formation cleared the station's defensive perimeter and oriented toward the jump corridor, I stood at the observation port on the command deck and looked back at the capital station growing smaller behind us. I noticed something small, something that no one else noticed, or if they did, no one else considered important. The Ilthari ambassador's vessel was already gone, not departing, not powering up, not requesting clearance from traffic control. Gone. The docking berth where Chelan Voss's diplomatic courier had been parked for the past 3 weeks was empty. I checked the departure logs later and confirmed what I suspected. The Ilthari vessel had begun its departure sequence before the council meeting ended. Chelan Voss had started running before Surath Vane finished dismissing him. He had come knowing we would refuse to listen, delivered his warning as a final act of decency toward a species he already considered doomed, and then he had fled the sector as fast as his ship could carry him. That detail sat in my gut like a cold stone for the entire 9-day journey to human space. I could not explain to anyone why it bothered me so much, because on the surface, it was trivial. A diplomat leaving quickly after a failed meeting. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like watching someone walk calmly away from a building they knew was about to collapse. Someone who did not run, because running would not help. Someone who simply wanted to be far enough away that they would not have to watch the structure come down. 9 days later, we reached human space, and the humans did exactly what Chelan Voss had warned us they would do. They did not forget, they did not forgive, and they did not stop. The 3 attacks went perfectly. That was the first thing that should have worried me, and it did not. We were so accustomed to success, so deeply conditioned by 400 years of military dominance, that perfection felt like confirmation rather than a warning. When everything goes exactly as planned against an unknown enemy, the correct response is suspicion. Perfection means either your enemy is truly helpless, or your enemy is allowing you to succeed. I knew this. I had written tactical papers on this exact principle, and I still did not see it, because I was standing on the bridge of the most powerful warship in 3 sectors, surrounded by officers who radiated confidence the way stars radiate light, and their certainty was infectious. Admiral Drayan's strike group hit the colony designated as Target Alpha, a human settlement called Hargrove Station, built on the surface of a rocky world rich in palladium deposits. The colony had a population of roughly 12,000 civilians and a small military garrison, consisting of perhaps 200 ground troops. Their orbital defenses were minimal, just 4 automated weapons platforms and a single patrol corvette that should not have been stationed there at all, based on the intelligence we had gathered during pre-operation surveillance. We destroyed the orbital platforms in under 3 minutes. They were decent technology, well-maintained and well-positioned, but they were designed to deter pirates and smugglers, not a Drashan battle group. The corvette was different. It fought. The small vessel placed itself directly between our lead cruisers and the colony below, interposing its hull as a physical shield, and opened fire with everything it had. Its weapons could not penetrate our armor. Its shields could not absorb our salvos. Every officer on Drayan's bridge knew that the corvette was going to die, and every officer on that corvette knew it too. But it fought for 7 full minutes against 22 warships, maneuvering with a skill that bordered on artistry, using the debris from the destroyed platforms as cover, making us work for every firing solution, buying time with its own existence. When it finally broke apart, there was no surrender broadcast, no distress signal, no escape pods, just silence, and then expanding debris, and then nothing. I watched the corvette's final moments on the tactical display and felt something shift inside me that I could not name. That crew had known they were dead the moment our fleet appeared, and they had chosen to fight anyway. Not to win. That was impossible. They fought to buy time. Time for what? That question would keep me awake for months. The ground operation took 4 hours. Our troops swept the colony in standard combat formation, securing the mineral processing facilities and rounding up civilians for transport. We took 641 humans from Hargrove Station. The other 2 strike groups reported similar results from Meridian Colony and Solace Point. Combined across all 3 worlds, we captured approximately 2,000 human civilians and stripped the settlements of every mineral stockpile worth the cost of transport. Total elapsed time from the first shot to the final withdrawal order was 5 hours and 42 minutes. By every measurable standard, the operation was a masterwork of military precision. I stood on the bridge during the withdrawal and watched the planet fall away beneath us, and something gnawed at me that I could not identify. The humans had fought. Their garrison troops had resisted with disciplined coordination that spoke of serious training and real combat doctrine. They fell back in organized patterns, covered civilian evacuation routes with interlocking fields of fire, and made us pay for every corridor, every building, every intersection. But they had not fought like people who expected to win. They had fought like people who were executing a predetermined plan, and that plan was not about victory. It was about duration. Every minute they kept fighting, bought another minute of something I could not see. The other thing that disturbed me was the prisoners themselves. I watched them being loaded onto our transport vessels through the bridge cameras. 641 men, women, and a handful of children, filing into the cargo holds with a quietness that did not match what had just happened to them. They were not broken. They were not weeping or screaming, or pleading for their families. They were quiet, controlled, organized. Some of them looked directly into the security cameras as they walked past, and the expression on their faces was something I could not categorize with any framework I possessed. It was not defiance. It was not fear, or resignation, or shock. It was something closer to patience. They looked like people who were waiting for something, and whatever they were waiting for, they were confident it would arrive. We withdrew behind Drashan borders without incident. No human pursuit fleet materialized behind us. No warning shots chased us across the boundary. No angry transmissions demanded our surrender or threatened retaliation. The journey home was quiet, and Admiral Drayan spent most of it in his quarters, composing his victory report with the satisfied precision of a man adding another trophy to a very long wall. The capital station received us as heroes. High Commander Surath Ven held a formal ceremony in the War Council chamber, the same room where Chelan Voss had stood trembling and begging weeks earlier. That irony was lost on no one, and several commanders made jokes about it during the reception that followed. Surath praised Drayan's tactical brilliance and the courage of the ground troops. He praised the hegemony's unbroken legacy and declared that the human frontier would be the next territory brought under Drashan authority. I was promoted to Senior Strategic Analyst, a title that came with expanded office space, a dedicated staff, and full access to the hegemony's classified intelligence networks. I accepted the promotion quietly. I said nothing about the feeling that had been growing in my chest since I watched a Corvette die buying time for a purpose I could not understand. I told myself I was being foolish. We had won. The operation was textbook. The humans had been exposed as vulnerable, just as Drayan had predicted. Weeks passed, then a month, then 2 months. Nothing happened. No diplomatic protests arrived through any channel. No military buildup appeared on long-range sensors. No demands for the return of prisoners. No angry broadcasts aimed at our population or our allies. No activity of any kind that could be interpreted as a response to our raids. Silence. Total. Complete. Absolute silence. And that silence was the most terrifying thing I had experienced in 30 years of military service, because every species we had ever attacked responded within days. The Polari had sent a furious diplomatic delegation within 48 hours of our first incursion. The Vorath Combine had launched a retaliatory strike within a week that we crushed easily, but at least we understood it as a normal, predictable reaction to aggression. The Cathani had surrendered within 3 days, offering tribute and territorial concessions in exchange for peace. Even the weakest civilizations we had subjugated managed some kind of response, a protest, a plea, a threat, something that acknowledged what had happened and attempted to address it. The humans gave us nothing. It was as if we had raided 3 empty worlds and taken 2,000 ghosts. I used my new security clearance to access the hegemony's Signal Intercept Division, the classified branch responsible for monitoring all communication traffic across neighboring territories. I spent 3 days reviewing the data, and what I found there kept me from sleeping for 3 consecutive nights afterward. Human communication traffic had not decreased after our attack. It had increased. The volume of encrypted transmissions moving through human space had tripled since the day of the raids. Their communication networks were burning with activity. Every relay, every satellite, every deep space transmission array, running at capacities we had never seen before. but none of it was directed at us. Not a single transmission pointed toward Drashan's space. They were talking to each other, constantly, intensely, across every node in their vast communication web, and we could not read a single word of it because their encryption protocols were so far beyond anything our analysts had encountered that our best cryptographers described them as theoretically unbreakable. They were planning something. That much was obvious to anyone with basic intelligence training. A civilization does not triple its internal communication volume in response to a military attack unless it is coordinating something enormous. But the fact that none of that communication was aimed at us meant they were not preparing to negotiate. They were not preparing to threaten. They were not preparing to do anything that involved telling us what was coming. I requested a formal intelligence briefing from the War Council. I wanted to present my findings, recommend enhanced surveillance of human communication patterns, and propose increased border security along every possible approach vector. Surath Ven's aide told me, in the polished tone of someone delivering a dismissal wrapped in courtesy, that the High Commander appreciated my diligence, but felt my concerns were premature. I should enjoy my promotion and stop chasing shadows. Exactly 91 days after the raids, a Drashan merchant vessel called the Velkori's Pride vanished. She was a bulk carrier, running a routine supply route between two interior hegemony worlds, a route that passed nowhere near human territory or any contested border region. She carried a crew of 34 and a cargo of industrial components. Her last routine check-in reported normal operations. Her next scheduled check-in never came. No distress signal. No emergency beacon. No debris field. No energy signatures consistent with weapons fire or drive failure. The ship and her crew simply ceased to exist. The Merchant Guild filed a missing vessel report. The Navy dispatched a search patrol that found nothing. The incident was classified as a probable navigational error, resulting in uncharted hazard collision. It happens sometimes, even in well-mapped space. 8 days later, the cargo hauler Tesrin disappeared on a different route, also deep inside Drashan territory. Then the ore freighter Dunavar on a third route. Then the passenger liner Korshan, carrying 200 Drashan civilians between colony worlds. 4 ships in 3 weeks, all on internal trade routes that had been traveled safely for decades, all vanishing without a trace, without a signal, without a shred of physical evidence that anything had gone wrong. No species had ever operated inside Drashan space undetected. Our sensor networks were the most comprehensive in the sector, covering every approach vector, every jump corridor, every navigational waypoint within our borders. Whatever was taking our ships was moving through our territory like a predator through dark water, invisible and patient, and utterly impossible according to everything we understood about the limitations of stealth technology. I went back to the Signal Intercept Division with a new request. I wanted full analysis of every piece of navigational data associated with the missing vessels, not just their final positions, but their entire route histories for the weeks preceding their disappearances. The analysts gave me what I asked for, and when I finished reviewing the data, my hands were shaking so badly I could not hold the display pad steady. The ships were not being attacked. Their transponder signals were not being cut off abruptly or violently, the way they would if weapons fire or a catastrophic hull breach had destroyed them. The signals were being shut down, cleanly, deliberately, in sequence, as if someone aboard each vessel was systematically deactivating each system one at a time before the ship vanished from our tracking networks. And the navigational data from the last confirmed positions revealed something worse. Every one of the missing ships had altered course before vanishing. The alterations were small, so small that automated traffic control systems would not flag them as anomalous. A fraction of a degree here, a minor timing adjustment there. But each alteration moved the vessel away from its scheduled route and into areas of space where our sensor coverage was thinner. Into blind spots. Blind spots that should not have existed. I pulled the maintenance logs for every navigational buoy along the 6 trade corridors where the ships had disappeared, and I found what I was dreading. The buoys had been repositioned. Subtly, carefully. Each one moved just enough to create a tiny gap in sensor coverage, a gap too small to notice unless you were specifically looking for it, but large enough to hide a ship that had been guided into the right position at the right time. Someone had been inside our navigation infrastructure for weeks, possibly months, moving our own equipment, adjusting our own systems, preparing our territory the way a hunter prepares a killing ground, setting snares and clearing sight lines, and making sure the prey would walk exactly where it needed to walk when the time came. And we had not noticed any of it, because every individual change was too small and too careful to trigger any alarm we had ever designed. I ran from the Intelligence Division to the War Council chamber. I demanded an audience with Surath Vane. I was kept waiting for 2 hours, during which I paced the anteroom and tried to organize the cascade of evidence in my mind into something that would penetrate the wall of confidence and contempt that surrounded the High Commander like armor. When I was finally admitted, I presented everything. The communication surge, the missing ships, the altered transponder sequences, the repositioned buoys, the blind spots. I laid it all out with the methodical precision that 30 years of tactical analysis had trained into me, and I watched Surath Vane's face as he absorbed it. He listened. He frowned. He asked 2 or 3 questions that showed he understood the technical details. And then he told me that merchant ships go missing occasionally in any large territory, that navigational buoys drift due to gravitational effects and solar radiation pressure, and that I was constructing a paranoid fantasy out of coincidences because I had allowed the Ilthari ambassador's theatrics to infect my judgment. I left his office knowing that I had failed, and knowing that the failure was going to cost us in ways I could not yet calculate. I went to the only place I could think of where someone might have answers, the prisoner holding facility on the capital station's lower decks, where 641 humans from Hargrove Station were being held in modular detention blocks under standard military guard. What I found there ended any remaining doubt I had about what was happening to us. The facility commander, a career officer named Thesson Krull, met me at the security checkpoint with a bored expression. He told me the prisoners were calm, cooperative, and unremarkable. All accounted for. No incidents. I asked to see the original intake manifests, the documents logged by the transport vessel crews when the prisoners were first loaded aboard at Hargrove Station. Thesson pulled them up without concern. The manifests, signed by the transport crew and countersigned by the ground operation commander, listed 652 prisoners received from Hargrove Station. The current population of the detention block was 641. 11 humans were missing. Not escaped. There were no breach alerts in the security logs, no sensor trips, no guard reports, no evidence of any kind that anyone had left the facility through any exit, authorized or otherwise. The 11 were simply not there. And when I compared the transport manifests to the detention facility's own intake records, the internal documents listed only 641 arrivals. Someone had altered the facility's records with such precision that the discrepancy only became visible when you cross-referenced them against the transport crew's independent logs, documents, stored in a completely separate database on a completely different system. 11 humans had vanished from a maximum security military detention facility on the Drashan capital station without triggering a single alarm, because someone had changed the records to make it look like those 11 people had never existed. I ordered Thesson to lock down the entire detention block immediately. Then I asked him to bring me the senior-ranking prisoner, a woman listed on the manifest as a colony infrastructure engineer named Grace Whitfield. She arrived in the interrogation room looking calm, composed, almost relaxed, as if she had been expecting this conversation and had been patiently waiting for me to get around to having it. I asked her where the 11 missing prisoners had gone. She said nothing. I asked her what the humans were planning. She said nothing. I asked her if she understood that the Drashan hegemony had the capability and the willingness to respond to any hostile action with force that would make our initial raids look gentle by comparison. Grace Whitfield looked at me across the interrogation table with steady brown eyes and spoke for the first time. Her voice was level and unhurried, carrying no emotion that I could detect, as if she were explaining a simple mechanical process to a technician who should have already understood it. "You are still in the early phase," she said. "You will not recognize the middle phase until it is already behind you." I asked her what that meant. She smiled, and the smile was more unsettling than any threat I had ever received across a negotiating table. It was the smile of someone watching a countdown that only she could see, and she was entirely comfortable with where the numbers were heading. I reported the missing prisoners to the War Council within the hour. This time, Surath Ven could not dismiss me completely. 11 vanished humans from a secure facility on his own station was not a navigational buoy drifting in space. It was a direct penetration of hegemony security at the highest level, and even his iron confidence could not make that disappear. He ordered an internal security review and authorized increased patrols along the trade corridors where ships had been vanishing. Standard responses, predictable responses, exactly the kind of responses that a species with 400 years of undefeated military tradition would naturally reach for, because those responses had always been sufficient before. 2 days later, a Drashan military listening post on the outer perimeter of our territory went dark. Monitoring Station Krev 7, a deep space installation crewed by 40 intelligence analysts, was responsible for tracking all traffic entering Drashan space from the galactic east. It was one of our most sensitive assets, positioned to give early warning of any fleet movement from human territory. Admiral Drayan, still riding the prestige of his successful raids, dispatched a fast patrol squadron to investigate. They arrived at Krev 7 to find the station intact and fully operational. Lights on. Life support running. The crew was alive, unharmed, sitting at their stations with expressions that mixed confusion with the kind of deep unease that comes from knowing something impossible has happened to you. Every piece of data on the station was gone. Not corrupted, not scrambled, not overwritten with garbage. Erased. Years of intercepted communications, navigational charts, fleet movement analyses, diplomatic intelligence, sensor calibration records, all of it had been wiped with a thoroughness that our forensic technicians described as beyond anything they had encountered or believed possible. The storage cores appeared factory new, as if the station had been built yesterday and no one had ever used it. The crew reported no intruders, no alarms, no unusual readings on any sensor. They had been at their posts, performing routine duties, when every screen on the station went blank simultaneously, for approximately 3 seconds, and then came back showing empty directories where years of critical intelligence data had been moments before. Whatever had erased the data had done it remotely, through systems that were supposed to be air-gapped from external networks, in 3 seconds, without leaving a single trace in any log. Except for one file. A single document had been placed on the station commander's personal terminal, a terminal that required biometric authentication and was physically disconnected from the station's main network. The document was a roster, a complete, verified list of every Drashan military officer who had participated in the 3 colony raids. Names, ranks, unit designations, current duty assignments, home stations, residential block numbers, family members, daily routines, security clearance levels, medical records. My name was on the list. My residential block on the capital station. The corridor I walked each morning to reach the War Council chamber. The name of the restaurant where I ate dinner 3 evenings a week. My physician's name, and the date of my last medical examination. The file contained no threat, no demand, no ultimatum, no message of any kind beyond the data itself. And it did not need one, because the message was the file. The humans were telling us, without words, that they knew the identity and location of every person who had participated in the attacks on their colonies, and they possessed the ability to reach those people at will, inside our most secure facilities, without being detected. I brought the file to the War Council. I placed it on the table in front of Surath Ven and the assembled commanders, and said 3 words. Return the prisoners. He refused. The hegemony does not bow to implied threats, he said. We are the dominant military power in this sector, and we will not be intimidated by tricks and data thefts. I left the chamber knowing we were running out of time, and knowing that no one with the authority to act would listen until it was too late. That night, I sat alone in my quarters staring at the viewport, watching the distant stars, and trying to calculate how long we had before the early phase that Grace Whitfield had mentioned ended, and whatever came next began. I did not have enough data to complete the calculation, and that absence of knowledge was the most frightening element of all. The humans were operating on a timeline I could not see, executing a strategy I could not map, moving pieces across a board whose dimensions I could not measure, and every action they took revealed just enough capability to make us afraid, while revealing nothing about their ultimate objective. I thought about Chalon Voss, trembling in the War Council chamber, begging us to listen. I understood him now. He had not been afraid of the humans, not in the way we fear an enemy who might kill us. He had been afraid because he had already lived through what was coming for us, 11 years of slow, patient, invisible dismantlement. And he knew that by the time we understood what was happening, it would be far too late to change the outcome. At precisely midnight, every display screen on the Capitol station flickered. Every screen in every room, every corridor, every office, every detention block, every residential quarter, every mess hall, every medical bay, every engineering section, all of them, simultaneously, showed the same thing for exactly 4 seconds. A single line of text in perfect Drashan script. "We know where all of you live." Then the screens returned to normal. The station's entire technical division spent the next 72 hours tearing apart every system, every network, every relay, searching for any trace of the intrusion. They found nothing. As far as every computer on the station was concerned, the message had never appeared. No log recorded it. No sensor detected it. No system registered any anomaly at all. But every Drashan on that station saw it. Every officer, every civilian, every guard standing watch in the prisoner facility, every cook in the galley, every child in the residential sections. They all saw it, and they all understood exactly what it meant. The early phase was over. I spent the following weeks building an intelligence case that no one in a position of authority wanted to examine. I compiled every anomaly into a single strategic assessment. The missing merchant ships, the altered navigational records, the repositioned sensor buoys, the vanished prisoners, the erased listening post, the impossible data intrusion that put a classified roster onto an air-gapped terminal, the midnight message that appeared on every screen and left no trace. I arranged all of it into a coherent narrative and presented my conclusions to the War Council in the most direct language I could manage. The humans were not preparing for a conventional war. They had already initiated an operation against us, and every event since the raids was part of a coordinated campaign designed to achieve objectives I could identify only in part. They had penetrated our territory, our infrastructure, our intelligence networks, and our most secure facilities. They had demonstrated the ability to move through our space undetected, manipulate our systems remotely, extract personnel from maximum security containment, and access information that should have been impossible to reach. And they had done all of this without firing a single weapon at a Drashan military target. My recommendation was immediate and unambiguous. Return all prisoners. Open direct diplomatic communication with human leadership. Negotiate terms that would halt whatever operation was underway before it progressed beyond the point of recovery. Surath Ven read my report and passed it to what remained of the senior command staff. The Council's response was to increase military readiness along the human border, dispatch additional patrol squadrons to guard the internal trade routes, and authorize the construction of new sensor platforms to close the coverage gaps created by the repositioned buoys. Standard military responses. Conventional thinking applied to an unconventional threat. The kind of countermeasures that any competent general would implement when facing a hostile force that was operating inside their territory. And that was the problem. The humans were not operating inside our territory the way any hostile force in our experience had ever operated. They were not a fleet to be engaged. They were not infiltrators who could be found by increasing patrols. They were not saboteurs who could be stopped by hardening systems. They were something else entirely, something our military doctrine had no category for, and every countermeasure we deployed was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what we were facing. The next blow landed where I least expected it, which was, I later realized, exactly where the humans intended it to land. A trade agreement between the hegemony and the Vorath Combine, a partnership that had been the cornerstone of our economic strategy for 80 years, collapsed without warning. The Vorath government issued a formal severance notice, citing verified evidence of Drashan black market operations conducted on Vorath territory. The evidence package was extraordinary, containing classified communications between Drashan intelligence officers and criminal organizations operating inside the Vorath Combine, complete with timestamps, encryption keys, financial transfer records, and surveillance imagery that could only have been captured by someone with access to our own classified archives. The hegemony denied everything. The Vorath published the complete evidence package on open diplomatic channels for the entire galactic community to review. The partnership, 80 years of mutual benefit and strategic cooperation, dissolved within a week. 3 days after the Vorath severance, the Chthoni Federation announced the immediate termination of their mutual defense treaty with the hegemony, citing a separate evidence package documenting Drashan espionage operations on Chthoni soil. The evidence was different in detail but identical in quality, thorough, verified, irrefutable, and clearly sourced from deep inside our own intelligence apparatus. Then the Polari Confederation withdrew their ambassador. Then the Torshi League suspended all trade and recalled their commercial fleet from Drashan ports. Then the Melvari Compact placed a formal complaint before the Galactic Mediation Council, requesting an investigation into Drashan covert operations across 7 neutral territories. In the span of 18 days, 5 of the hegemony's 6 major diplomatic and economic partnerships were either destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair. Each one was undermined by an intelligence package so specific, so thoroughly documented, and so devastating in its revelations that no amount of denial could counter it. None of it was traceable to the humans. None of the evidence bore any human fingerprint or digital signature. The information was genuine Drashan intelligence, real operations conducted by real Drashan officers, real crimes committed by real Drashan agents. The humans had not fabricated a single detail. They had simply found what we had done, organized it into weapons-grade dossiers, and delivered those dossiers to the people we had been secretly betraying for decades. They turned our own sins into ammunition, and they fired it with precision that left us no cover. The corruption scandal came next. Admiral Drayan Kor's personal communications were leaked, not to foreign governments this time, but to the Drashan public through anonymous data drops placed on civilian information networks. The messages documented a long-running scheme involving Drayan and 3 members of the War Council, detailing the diversion of military procurement funds into private investment portfolios. The amounts were staggering. The corruption was systemic and undeniable. Drayan was stripped of his rank and placed under arrest by the military judiciary within 48 hours. 2 council members resigned. A third was detained pending investigation. High Commander Surath Vane called an emergency session of what remained of the War Council. The chamber felt much larger than it had during the vote to attack the human colonies, because so many seats were now empty. The mood had shifted from confidence to something I had never seen among Drashan military leadership. They were frightened, not of an enemy fleet on their borders, or a weapon pointed at their worlds. They were frightened of something they could not see, could not fight, and could not understand. I stood before the surviving council and made my case one final time. The humans were methodically destroying every structure that gave the hegemony its power, not through military force, but through information, through exposure, through the precise, surgical application of truth. Every alliance we depended on was being severed. Every corrupt practice we relied on was being revealed. Every hidden foundation of our authority was being dragged into daylight and shown to the galaxy for what it was. Return the prisoners, I said. Open negotiations. Give them a reason to stop. Because if we do not stop this now, there will be nothing left to negotiate with. Surath Vane looked at me with an expression I recognized, because I had seen it on the face of every officer who has ever watched the situation around them collapse, while refusing to accept that their own decisions caused it. The hegemony does not negotiate, he said, his voice carrying the hollow ring of a man repeating a phrase that has become a prison rather than a principle. Within a week, 3 of our largest defense contractors discovered that their proprietary weapons patents were being challenged in galactic trade courts across 9 jurisdictions simultaneously. The challenges were filed by shell companies registered on neutral worlds, funded through financial channels so convoluted that our Economic Intelligence Division spent 2 weeks tracing them and still could not identify the source. The legal documentation supporting each challenge included technical specifications that had been extracted from the contractor's own classified development servers, designs that existed only behind the most advanced digital security systems our technology could produce. The legal proceedings would take years. The financial damage was immediate. The contractors' combined market value dropped by nearly 40% in a single trading cycle, and the downstream effects rippled through the hegemony's entire defense industrial base. Suppliers could not get paid. Subcontractors lost their orders. Shipyard workers were furloughed as production lines stalled, waiting for components that were no longer being manufactured. The hegemony's economy, already strained to the breaking point by the loss of 5 trade partnerships, began to buckle under the combined weight of diplomatic isolation, public scandal, and industrial collapse. Tax revenues fell, infrastructure maintenance was deferred, military procurement budgets were frozen. For the first time in 4 centuries, Drshan citizens began to question whether their government was capable of protecting them, and the answer they kept finding was no. Surath Ven's response was the one I had been dreading since the day the midnight message appeared on our screens. He ordered full military mobilization. Every warship in the Drshan fleet, every fighter, every troop carrier, every logistics vessel, every armed platform capable of independent operation, all of it, every piece of military hardware the hegemony possessed, would be assembled into a single overwhelming force and hurled at the human core worlds. We would not raid colonies this time. We would strike their shipyards, their command centers, their industrial infrastructure. We would burn their worlds until the humans had nothing left to threaten us with. I was assigned to the command ship as senior tactical advisor. I accepted the posting because the alternative was arrest for insubordination, and because some dying fragment of my professional instinct still believed I could influence the outcome if I remained close to the decision-makers. The fleet assembled in 3 days. Over 300 warships, the largest military force the hegemony had ever deployed, arranged in full attack formation. Admiral Hasek Ren, Drayan's replacement, stood on the command bridge and looked at the tactical display with the expression of a man who believes that sufficient force can solve any problem. I stood beside him and felt nothing but the hollow certainty that we were doing exactly what the humans expected us to do. We jumped to human space. We found nothing. The colonies we had raided months earlier were empty. Not damaged, not destroyed, empty. The buildings were standing, the power systems were running, the streets were clean, but every human being, every piece of military hardware, every defense platform, every ship, every shuttle, every piece of mobile infrastructure was gone. 12,000 people had been evacuated from 3 worlds so completely and so thoroughly that they might as well have never been there. And our intelligence division, the same organization that was supposed to detect exactly this kind of large-scale population movement, had not detected a single transport. Admiral Ren ordered the fleet to proceed to the nearest human core system. We jumped. Empty stations orbited empty worlds. No ships, no signals, no targets. He ordered another jump, and another, and another. Each system was the same, abandoned, silent, waiting. The fleet burned fuel at a tremendous rate, jumping from system to system across human-mapped space, hunting for an enemy that refused to be found. And then Admiral Ren gave the order to return home, and we discovered the true scope of what the humans had done to us. Our jump coordinates were compromised. The navigational data that our drives relied on to calculate safe transit routes had been corrupted by the same subtle buoy repositioning that had created the sensor blind spots months earlier. The contamination had been propagating through our navigation network for so long, passed from buoy to buoy, from ship to ship, from database to database, that every star chart in our fleet contained errors, small errors, individually harmless, but cumulatively sufficient to make every jump calculation unreliable. Our drives would function, our ships were undamaged, but we could not trust our charts to take us where we needed to go, and in faster-than-light navigation, trust is the only thing that separates a successful jump from an emergence into empty interstellar space, millions of kilometers from the nearest star system. 300 warships, the most powerful fleet in 3 galactic sectors, stranded in human-mapped territory, with corrupted navigation data and a dwindling fuel supply, because the depots along our planned return routes had been drained weeks before we departed. Drained so subtly and so gradually that the automated inventory systems had not flagged the losses. I stood on the bridge beside Admiral Wren and felt the complete absence of options settle over me like a physical weight. Not a difficult choice between unpleasant alternatives. Not a risky gamble that might pay off. Nothing. We had nowhere to go. Nothing to fight. No way to sustain 300 ships in hostile territory, and no way to get home. This was never a war. I understood that now, with a clarity that was almost peaceful in its finality. This was a hunt, and it had begun the moment the Ilthari ambassador walked into our council chamber to deliver a warning we were too proud to hear. Every step we had taken since that day, every defiant declaration, every refusal to negotiate, every predictable escalation, every conventional military response, had been anticipated, accounted for, and incorporated into a plan so comprehensive that we had been executing it on the humans' behalf from the very beginning. The humans did not need to fight the Drashan fleet. They did not need to risk their ships or their people in battle. They just needed us to remove our fleet from Drashan space and place it somewhere it could not interfere with the final phase of their operation. And we had done exactly that. We had flown 300 warships into a trap so elegant that we had spent months building it ourselves, brick by brick, decision by decision, responding to each provocation in precisely the way the humans had predicted we would respond. The bridge was silent. Wren's staff stared at their displays, each officer slowly reaching the same conclusion through their own chain of reasoning. The greatest military force in Drashan history was not defeated. It was irrelevant. It had been made irrelevant by an enemy who understood that the most powerful weapon is not the one that destroys a fleet, but the one that makes a fleet destroy itself. Then the communications officer reported a contact, a single object at the edge of sensor range, not a warship, not a fleet, a drone, a small, unarmed communications relay broadcasting on all frequencies in the clear. Wren ordered it patched through to the main speakers. A human voice filled the bridge. It was calm, it spoke in accented but grammatically perfect Drashan, and it carried no anger, no triumph, no emotion of any kind. It sounded like someone reading a prepared statement that they had reviewed many times to ensure every word was precisely correct. This message is addressed to the officers and crew of the Drashan Hegemony Fleet. Your capital station has been peacefully boarded by joint human and Drashan security forces, acting under authority granted by the Drashan Judiciary Council. All prisoners taken during the raids on Hargrove Station, Meridian Colony, and Solace Point have been recovered and are being returned to their families. The members of the Hegemony War Council have been arrested by your own internal security division following an independent judicial review of evidence documenting corruption, misuse of military resources, and constitutional violations. This evidence was compiled over a period of 14 months and has been verified by 3 independent Drashan judicial bodies. Silence on the bridge. No one breathed. Your fleet's navigational systems have been compromised. We are prepared to transmit corrected navigational data sufficient for safe return to Drashan space, conditional on the fleet maintaining stand-down status and taking no hostile action during transit. All vessels will be permitted to return to their home ports without interference. The voice paused, and when it continued, it was the same measured tone, but something in it had shifted, some quality that was not quite warmth but was not cold either. This offer remains open indefinitely. We understand that verification of these claims will require time. Your long-range communication systems are fully functional. You may contact your capital station through standard channels at any time to confirm the information provided in this broadcast. The message began to loop. Wren stood motionless for a long time, staring at the main display, as if the answers he needed might materialize from the starfield itself. Then he looked at me. His face held the expression of a man who has just felt the foundations of everything he believed crack and give way beneath him, leaving him standing on nothing. He asked me what I recommended. Contact the capital station, I said. Verify everything, and then accept the terms, because they are the best terms we will ever receive from a species we should never have provoked. He did. It took 40 minutes to establish a secure link through the deep space relay network. When the connection stabilized, the face on the screen was not Surath Vane. It was a Drashan internal security commander named Torin Vasht, and behind him, visible through the War Council chamber's panoramic viewports, Two human officers stood quietly beside the main tactical display. They were unarmed. They were not guarding anything. They were simply present, the way witnesses are present at a legal proceeding. Torin confirmed everything the broadcast had stated. The War Council was in custody, arrested by Drashan security forces under warrants issued by the Judiciary Council. The evidence against them had been independently verified and accepted by the courts. The human prisoners had been recovered from the detention facility without resistance and were being processed for return to their homeworlds. Human operatives, 14 of them, had presented themselves at the capital station's security headquarters 6 hours earlier, carrying no weapons, bearing encrypted data drives containing 14 months of compiled evidence, and had formally requested that Drashan law enforcement review the material and take whatever action Drashan law required. They had not invaded. They had not threatened. They had not demanded surrender. They had walked through our front door, unarmed, and asked us to hold our own leaders accountable, using our own legal system, and they had provided the evidence to make it work. Ren stared at the screen for what felt like a very long time. I watched the muscles in his jaw work as he processed the reality that 300 warships, the combined military strength of the most feared power in 3 sectors, had been rendered meaningless by 14 unarmed humans carrying data drives. Then he gave the order to stand down and request the corrected navigational data. It arrived within minutes. Clean, accurate, cross-verified against our backup star charts, the encrypted copies stored in sealed vaults aboard each flagship that were specifically maintained for navigational emergencies. The data matched perfectly. The humans had not only corrected our charts, they had done so with a precision that demonstrated they understood our navigation systems better than we did. The fleet began the journey home. 300 warships, undamaged, unfought, every weapon system loaded, every crew at full strength, traveling in formation through the silent dark between stars. No one spoke on the bridge for the first 3 hours of the transit. There was nothing to say. The most powerful military force in Drashan history was returning from a campaign in which it had not fired a single shot and not encountered a single enemy vessel. And it was returning because its own government had been arrested in its absence by 14 people who did not even bring weapons. The capital station appeared on long-range sensors 6 hours into the transit, and as it grew in the viewport, I studied it carefully, looking for signs of damage, occupation, or change. There were none. The station looked exactly as it had when we departed. The lights were on. The docking bays were open. Commercial traffic moved in normal patterns around its perimeter. Nothing appeared different. But everything was different. Everything had changed. The universe we had left when we flew those 300 ships toward human space no longer existed. It had been replaced, quietly and completely, while we were gone. The humans did not stay. That was what confused everyone the most in the days and weeks that followed, and it was the detail that frightened me the deepest, because it revealed a kind of strategic thinking that no other species in our collective experience had ever displayed. They did not occupy our territory. They did not station forces on our worlds. They did not install a puppet government or appoint a governor or demand a permanent military presence. They did not claim reparations or territory or tribute or any of the things that every conquering species in galactic history has claimed upon achieving victory. They arrested the leaders who had authorized the attack, returned the people who had been taken, published the full intelligence dossier on hegemony corruption for open public access, so that every Drashan citizen could see exactly who had been governing them and what those leaders had been doing with the power entrusted to them, and then they left. They gathered their 14 operatives, boarded their transport, and left Drashan space as quietly as they had entered it. That departure was more terrifying than any occupation would have been, because it meant the humans were not interested in controlling us. Control implies ongoing commitment, presence, responsibility. The humans wanted something simpler and something far more profound. They wanted to ensure that the specific individuals who had harmed their people could never do it again. The War Council was the threat. The War Council was removed. The corruption that enabled the War Council was the environment that produced the threat. The corruption was exposed. The mission, as the humans defined it, was complete. They did not need us. They did not want our territory. They did not covet our resources. They simply required that we stop being dangerous. and they accomplished that requirement with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor while leaving the patient alive and capable of recovery. During the transition period, as the Drashan judiciary worked through the mountain of evidence and the reformed civilian government began to establish itself, I received a message on my personal terminal. It came through secure diplomatic channels, encrypted with protocols I did not recognize, and the sender identified herself as Grace Whitfield, infrastructure engineer, Hargrove Station. I met her in a conference room on the station's diplomatic level, a neutral space used for sensitive discussions. She was the same woman I had interrogated in the prisoner facility months earlier, the one who had told me about the early phase with that patient, steady voice. She looked well, rested, composed, as if the intervening months had been an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe for the species holding her captive. She was not an infrastructure engineer. She told me this without hesitation or apology, the way someone might correct a clerical error on a form. Her name was Grace Whitfield, that much was real. But she was an intelligence operative assigned to Human Strategic Operations Command, not a civilian. She had been embedded among the Hargrove Station colonists 3 years before the Drashan raids, placed there because human analysts had calculated, based on 6 years of intelligence gathering on the hegemony, that Drashan military planners would eventually target frontier colonies for resource extraction. She was one of 11 operatives distributed across the 3 most likely target worlds, and all 11 had deliberately allowed themselves to be captured during the raids. Allowed. I want to emphasize that word. Not failed to escape. Not been caught despite efforts to evade. Allowed. They walked onto our transport ships with the other prisoners, knowing exactly what they were walking into, because being inside Drashan detention was part of the operation. They were placed among the captives to be captured, so that they could operate from within our most secure facilities while their colleagues operated from without. I asked her how long the full operation had taken. 14 months from the day of the raids to the arrest of the War Council, she said. 3 years including the preparation and positioning phase. But our surveillance of the hegemony began 6 years ago, when your intelligence services first started mapping human border systems. We noticed your interest long before your War Council formally discussed it. 6 years. They had been watching us for 6 years before we made the decision to attack. They knew about our ambitions before we had fully formed them. I asked how many personnel were involved in the operation that brought down the Drashan hegemony. Fewer than 300, she said, and her voice carried no pride, just the factual precision of an after-action report. 300 operatives, working across 14 months. No fleet engagements, no orbital bombardments, no civilian casualties on your side, no massacres, no atrocities, just work. I asked her why. Why this way? Why not simply bring a fleet and end it with force? Humanity clearly possessed the intelligence capabilities to win a conventional war against us. Why choose this elaborate, patient, invisible approach instead? Grace Whitfield looked at me for a moment, and for the first time in our interactions, I saw something in her eyes that went beyond professional composure. It was conviction. Deep, quiet, immovable conviction. Because we do not want enemies, she said. We want neighbors. But when someone takes our people, we go and get them back. And we make sure it does not happen again. Those are the only 2 objectives. Everything else is method. I spent the following weeks researching the Ilthari conflict in the kind of detail that had not been available to me before the fall of the War Council, because the old government had classified most of the relevant intelligence reports. What I found in those declassified files shook me more deeply than anything else in this entire experience, because it showed me the full scope of what humanity was capable of when given sufficient time and sufficient motivation. The Ilthari attack on the human mining outpost had killed 47 people, 47 names, 47 families notified, 47 funerals held on human worlds, while the Ilthari Directorate marked the incident as resolved and moved on. The humans' response took 11 years. Not because they were slow, not because they lacked the capability for faster action. It took 11 years because they were thorough, in a way that transcends anything I have encountered in 30 years of studying military strategy across dozens of species. Over those 11 years, every institution in Ilthari society that had enabled, supported, or tolerated military aggression was systematically identified, analyzed, and neutralized. Military budgets were drained through a cascade of manufactured economic pressures that appeared to originate from natural market forces. Aggressive political leaders were undermined by the strategic, precisely timed release of their own private communications, revealing hypocrisy, corruption, and incompetence at moments calculated to cause maximum political damage. Weapons development programs were sabotaged through supply chain disruptions so subtle and so carefully layered that the Ilthari engineers responsible for those programs blamed manufacturing defects and material quality issues rather than external interference. The humans did not destroy the Ilthari military. They made it irrelevant. They drained its funding, discredited its leaders, disrupted its supply chains, and eroded its political support base until the Ilthari Directorate woke up one day and discovered that it could not wage war anymore. Not because it had been conquered, but because the entire infrastructure of military capability had been quietly disassembled around it, piece by piece, over more than a decade, with such patience and precision that most Ilthari citizens did not even realize it had happened. They simply found themselves living in a society that no longer had the means or the political will to attack anyone. And then the humans extended an offer of partnership, economic cooperation, technology sharing, cultural exchange programs, scientific collaboration. They reached out their hand to the same species they had spent 11 years methodically dismantling, and they did it with what appeared to be genuine warmth and genuine interest in building something positive. The Ilthari accepted, because by that point, partnership with humanity was not just the best option available, it was the only option that made sense. And in the years since, the Ilthari Directorate has become one of humanity's closest and most loyal allies. Not through force, not through intimidation or occupation, or the imposition of external authority, through the patient removal of everything that made the Ilthari dangerous, followed by the genuine, sustained offer of something better. Grace Whitfield confirmed all of this when I asked her about it directly. "This is what we do," she said. "We do not destroy civilizations. We do not exterminate species. We do not burn worlds or enslave populations. We identify the threat, we remove the threat, and we offer a path forward. If the path is accepted, we become the most loyal, most reliable partners you will ever find. If the path is not accepted, we wait. Because eventually, the path forward always becomes more attractive than the alternative." I asked her what the alternative was. She looked at me for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something that was not a threat, but was infinitely more serious than one. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the calm certainty of someone describing a natural law. "The alternative is that we keep going. We have never abandoned an operation before it reached completion. Not once. Not in our entire history as a spacefaring species. If you run, we follow. If you hide, we find you. If you rebuild what we dismantled, we dismantle it again, faster, better, and more permanently. We are a patient species, Advisor Tholen. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day, and we survived by being the most persistent predators in our ecosystem. We did not chase the fastest prey. We followed the prey that believed it had escaped, and we followed it until it could not run anymore. That is who we are, that is what we do, and we have never found a reason to change." She paused, and the silence in the conference room was absolute. "That is why the Ilthari ambassador came to warn you. Not because he feared for your people, but because he knew, from 11 years of personal experience, that once we begin, we do not stop. And he understood that the only moment you could have avoided what happened to you was the moment before you chose to attack. Once that choice was made, the outcome was no longer in your hands. It was in ours." That moment had passed more than a year before she and I sat in that conference room. It had passed the instant Surath Vane called the vote, and 14 commanders laughed at a trembling diplomat who had crossed an entire sector to try to save their civilization. The reformed Drashan government offered me a position on the joint Drashan Human Advisory Board 6 months after the fleet returned. The appointment required approval from both governments, and the humans approved it without hesitation. I accepted, because I could not think of a more important use of whatever years of service I had left. On my first day in the new role, The human ambassador to the reformed hegemony, a tall, gray-haired man named Daniel Ashford, met me in his office and handed me a small data chip. He said it was my file. I did not understand what he meant until I inserted the chip into my terminal and found a document that spanned hundreds of pages. It was everything the humans had recorded about me over the course of the 14-month operation. Every movement I made on the capital station, tracked through methods I still do not fully understand. Every communication I sent, including encrypted military channels I had believed were secure. Every tactical recommendation I delivered to the War Council, including the ones urging caution, the ones advocating for prisoner return, and the ones warning that the humans were operating inside our territory. My daily routine, my dietary preferences, my medical history, the names and locations of my extended family on 3 colony worlds. The time I spent each evening at the observation port, staring at the stars. Even that. Even the private, solitary moments of a man trying to make sense of a situation that was beyond his control. Daniel Ashford watched me scroll through the file, and when I looked up, his expression held something that was not pity and not triumph. It was respect. Quiet, measured, professional respect. "Your file is the reason you are sitting in that chair today," he said. "We track everyone involved in an operation against our people. Everyone. Most of those files contain evidence of hostility, corruption, or strategic danger. Your file was different. It showed a man who recognized what was happening before anyone else in his government. A man who tried to stop it. A man who argued for peace and was ignored by people too proud to listen to reason. We identified you early in the operation as someone who could be worked with, and we made sure that the transition preserved your position and your influence." I asked him when they had started monitoring me specifically. He smiled. It was a small smile, without malice, the kind of expression a teacher might wear when a student finally grasps a concept they have been struggling with. "The day your fleet departed for human space," he said. "You stood at the observation port on the command deck and looked back at the capital station as it receded behind you, and you noticed that the Ilthari ambassador's ship was already gone. You stared at that empty docking berth for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. That was the moment we knew you were paying attention. They had been watching me since before the raids. Since the moment the fleet left the station, they had seen me notice the missing Ilthari vessel, and they had interpreted that observation correctly, as a sign of intelligence, awareness, and the capacity for doubt, and they had tagged me as an asset worth preserving when the order they were planning to dismantle finally came down. 4 minutes and 17 seconds of staring at an empty docking berth, and the humans had built a psychological profile comprehensive enough to predict my behavior across 14 months of escalating crisis. I have served on the advisory board for 4 years now. The Drashan hegemony still exists, but it bears little resemblance to the aggressive, corrupt, overconfident power that voted to raid 3 human colonies because it believed it could take what it wanted from anyone without consequence. The military has been restructured under civilian oversight. The intelligence services operate within judicial constraints. The trade partnerships that the humans destroyed have been rebuilt on foundations of transparency and mutual benefit, rather than blackmail and covert exploitation. The economy is recovering. The government functions. The people, for the first time in generations, have access to information about what their leaders are doing, and the legal mechanisms to hold those leaders accountable. The humans did not rebuild us. They did not design our new government, or write our new laws, or appoint our new leaders. They removed the parts that were broken and dangerous, and then they stepped back and let us decide what to build in their place. They offered help when we asked for it, expertise when we needed it, and patience when our progress was slow. But the choices were ours. The work was ours. The future we are building belongs to us. That is the part that most species do not understand when they hear the story of what happened to the Drashan hegemony. They hear about the dismantlement, the intelligence operation, the 14 unarmed operatives who brought down a 4th-century military power, and they think the lesson is about human strength. It is not. The lesson is about human purpose. They did not come to conquer us, or to punish us, or to prove their superiority. They came to get their people back, and to make sure no one in a position of authority would ever send Drashan warships against human civilians again. Once those objectives were met, they left, because those were the only objectives that mattered to them. Last month, a young Cathani warlord requested a meeting with me through back-channel diplomatic contacts. His name was Salik Dorn, and he had recently consolidated control over a significant military faction within the Cathani Federation. He was ambitious, intelligent, and supremely confident in the way that young military leaders are when they have won enough small victories to believe they understand how the galaxy works. He wanted intelligence on human military weaknesses, he told me, leaning forward across the table with the bright-eyed intensity of a predator preparing to leap, that the Cathani were developing plans to seize control of several human trade routes passing through contested space near the Cathani border. It would be a surgical operation, he assured me. Quick and decisive. The humans would accept the new reality because the cost of challenging the Cathani military in their own backyard would exceed the value of the disputed routes. I listened to him describe his plan, and I heard echoes. I heard Admiral Drayan's contempt. I heard Sarath Van's iron certainty. I heard the laughter of 14 commanders filling a room where an old diplomat stood trembling, trying to save their lives with a warning they were too proud to hear. I told Salik Dorn to sit down. He was already sitting, but his posture shifted. He leaned back, and something in his expression changed, because whatever he saw in my face was not what he expected to find. I told him about Chelin Voss. I told him how the old Yilthari ambassador had walked uninvited into the most secure room on our capital station and broken every rule of diplomatic conduct to deliver a message that no one wanted to hear. I told him about Hargrove Station, about the corvette that died buying time for a purpose we could not see, about the quiet prisoners with patient eyes who filed onto our transport ships with an expression that I now know was the look of people who understand that they are bait, and who accepted that role willingly because they trusted their species to come for them. I told him about the silence, the terrible, absolute silence that followed the raids, the absence of response that was worse than any retaliation, because it meant the humans were not reacting, they were planning. I told him about the merchant ships that vanished, the navigational buoys that moved, the sensor blind spots that appeared in our own territory, like holes opening in a net. I told him about 11 prisoners who disappeared from a maximum security facility without leaving a trace, and about a woman named Grace Whitfield who sat across an interrogation table from me and told me I was still in the early phase. I told him about screens flickering at midnight, about a message that appeared on every display in a capital station housing 300,000 people, a message that was there for 4 seconds and left no evidence it had ever existed. I told him about alliances that dissolved, corruption that was exposed, an economy that buckled, and a fleet of 300 warships that flew into empty space and found nothing to fight because the humans did not need to fight them. They just needed them gone. I told him about 14 unarmed people who walked through our front door carrying data drives instead of weapons and ended 400 years of military dominance in a single afternoon. I told him about Grace Whitfield sitting across a table from me one more time, months later, free and rested and completely at ease, explaining that humanity has never stopped an operation before it reached completion. Not once, not ever, in their entire history. And then I said the words. The same words that Chelin Voss said in the War Council chamber, the words that 14 commanders laughed at, the words that I have earned the right to speak because I watched them come true with my own eyes. They do not forget, they do not forgive, and they do not stop. Salik Dorn stared at me. His mandibles twitched the way Cathani mandibles twitch when they are processing information that contradicts their foundational assumptions about the way the universe operates. His eyes moved across my face, searching for something. Maybe deception, maybe exaggeration, maybe the particular kind of madness that would explain why a senior Drashan military advisor was telling him horror stories instead of providing tactical intelligence. Then he laughed. I did not laugh. I just looked at him, and I waited. I waited the way Chelin Voss must have waited in the moments after the council chamber doors closed behind him, standing in the corridor outside knowing that he had done everything he could, and it had not been enough. Because I knew something that Salik Dorn did not know, and it was the same thing that Chelin Voss had known when he stood trembling before 14 laughing commanders. I knew that somewhere in human space, an analyst was already reading an intelligence report about Salik Dorn's military consolidation and his ambitions regarding human trade routes. I knew that somewhere, a file with his name on it was being opened, and entries were being made, and a timeline was being constructed. I knew that the patient, persistent, relentless machinery of human strategic operations was already turning its attention toward a young Cathani warlord who believed he could take something that belonged to humanity and walk away unscathed. Chelun Vos tried to save us. He crossed a sector, broke every rule of diplomatic protocol, endured laughter and dismissal and exile, all to deliver a warning to a species too arrogant to hear it. He failed, and his failure cost the Drashan hegemony 400 years of accumulated power. I tried to save Salak Dorn. I sat across a table from him and told him, in detail, with evidence drawn from my own lived experience, exactly what would happen if he moved against human interests. I told him the truth, the complete truth, with nothing held back and nothing softened. He laughed, and I knew, watching that laughter, that I had failed in the same way Chelun had failed, for the same reason. Because the young and the proud and the confident do not listen to warnings from the old and the afraid. They cannot hear them. The warnings arrive in a language that only experience can teach, and by the time you learn to speak that language, the lessons it describes have already been carved into your bones. They never listen. They never do. And the humans are always watching. They are always patient. And they never, ever let you escape.